Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 9th episode of StoryMaps Live. We're really excited to have you here today. My name is Ross Donahue. I am on the StoryMaps team, and we're really excited to bring you another StoryMaps Live episode. So just a few housekeeping items. During this webinar, we'll be using the Q&A functionality. Feel free to put any questions you have into that chat. The Q&A function will allow us to respond to any questions related to story maps or to what our featured storytellers are asking. Now, at any time, I have colleagues on the line ready to answer those questions. We'll also be using the polling feature, and we're really excited to get started. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to the founder of StoryMaps, Alan Carroll.
Great, thanks so much, Ross, and welcome. So glad you could join us, and we're really excited about Clarissa and Cedric, who will be the stars of our show today. For that reason, I'm going to move relatively quickly and just give some basic information about story maps for those of you who might not be very familiar. I think probably most of you kind of know what we're all about, but just in case, here's a quick summary. So what is a story map? They are things that reside on the web that combine interactive maps, so maps that you might make on ArcGIS Online or on our desktop software or find in our ecosystem of maps, with multimedia content. So your photos, videos, audio, and text, of course, to tell stories about the world, all sorts of stories about the world. We've got just about everything you can imagine under the sun in terms of subject matter and in terms of geography. So everything from neighborhood scale to planet-wide, and occasionally to other planets, especially Mars. They work on a variety of screen sizes. So in other words, they're responsive. It's best to author story maps on large screens, but you can view them just as well, and the experience is pretty much just as rewarding on mobile devices as they are on tablets and PCs and Macs. Story maps incorporate interactive builders. So to me, this is the secret that makes story maps so accessible. You don't need to have any kind of web development skills. Essentially, if you can make a PowerPoint, you can make a story map. And if you can make a story map, why would you want to make a PowerPoint? I've more or less retired from PowerPoint just because story maps are so fun and engaging and dynamic. So the secret of our builder is this what we call the block palette, and you'll see that a little bit later. Imagine each one of these elements, different type formats and maps, images, videos, immersive sections as individual building blocks that you can use to construct a story and construct and rearrange and edit and publish. Story maps are hosted by Esri in the cloud on ArcGIS Online. We don't claim any sort of ownership. Is simply a place to park your content and not have to worry about maintaining a web infrastructure, servers, and all that stuff. We started about 10 years ago with what we now call our classic apps. So we kind of bootstrapped ourselves and created what became about a half dozen or so different web apps, each with its own builder, each of which told stories using maps and multimedia content in various different ways and user experiences. But a couple of years ago, we realized that it was time for a second generation effort, which would combine those different functions, those different user experiences into a single function, which we now call ArcGIS StoryMaps. This is the one that we're continually maintaining and updating. You'll see some of the latest additions or enhancements to ArcGIS StoryMaps in a few minutes. But the basic attraction of the new story maps is that we've updated the design. You can combine the different experiences that used to be in those separate apps. You can mix and match them within a single builder. So you only need to know one builder function. You can quickly pick that up and be able to put together all sorts of really rich interactive tales. It's been a very exciting time for us to watch the growth and popularity of story maps. We're now well over 1.5 million story maps hosted on Esri's cloud service, and many tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands more that we can't count because they're within enterprise systems and behind firewalls. Lots of organizations are using story maps, organizations large and small, government and non-governmental. Here in the US, EPA and NOAA have each published hundreds of story maps, our National Park Service and Forest Service, et cetera. We've long had conservation organizations and other conservation nonprofits using story maps. Increasingly, we're seeing story maps being used in the humanitarian space. And of course, you'll hear from UNHCR in just a little bit. So it's just been really thrilling to us to see these top drawer organizations using story maps to tell really important stories. And we hope to inspire people to action. Another kind of nice side effect of story maps is that they've become really popular in the classroom. We're seeing a ton of usage of story maps by teachers or educators for instructional purposes, but also, and maybe more excitingly, by students. So teachers are assigning students story maps as an alternative to traditional research papers, and we're seeing those by the thousands. We'll give you more information about where to go for lots of advice and where to launch story maps, et cetera. But the basic thing to remember is esri.com/storymaps. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back to Ross. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Alan. So for those of you who haven't used story maps before, like Alan said, the best way to get started is to go and open a new browser and type in esri.com/storymaps. Now, when you go there, you come to the story maps landing page. This has tons of information about the product itself, and you can see the stories that are being created by the broader story maps community. So here, some of you who are on this call right now, some of your stories might be featured in this area. So you can browse different topics of stories. You can also go and see the resources that our team and other teams at Esri are putting together to help you get started, as well as take your stories to the next level. Now, if you want to jump into the builder itself, you can just click Launch ArcGIS StoryMaps, and that opens up the builder. In here, you can see your previous stories that you've created. You can also create collections. And if you want to start making a story, you can just click New Story here. I'll start from scratch. And you can start assembling your content. Alan referred to the block palette. That's this thing right here where you click the plus button, and you have all these different types of content you can add to a story, whether it's text, rich multimedia, or immersive experiences for your readers. Now for this webinar, I'm really just going to focus on the updates to the product since our last webinar. If you have questions about the various features or how to get started using ArcGIS StoryMaps, we have lots of resources on that at our homepage. So I'm really excited to be able to share the latest enhancements to ArcGIS StoryMaps. These are essentially fresh off the press. These are items that have been developed recently. So the first one I want to talk about is the theme builder. So if you remember the theme builder, you can get to that by going to the design panel and clicking manage my themes. So in here, you can create new themes, or you can see the existing themes that I've already developed. Now within a specific theme, there are a couple new enhancements here. So one really major enhancement that we heard from you all was you want more font options. And so we're really excited to announce that you can now use the fonts that we've selected, but also it links up with Google Fonts. So in here you can see there are so many more font options to explore. Now, a big caveat here is just because there are font options doesn't mean you should use them. Some of them are, not very accessible fonts in terms of being able to see them and make them legible to all audiences. But this allows you to have more control over your story's look and feel and have it match with your organization's brand. In addition, we've added some more theming options like to your links here. And, definitely explore these because these are ways to add additional polish to your stories. Now, another request that we've been hearing from folks is to be able to share themes across an organization. And I'm happy to say that there's a workflow now for doing this. Now, this workflow uses ArcGIS online groups to be able to create a set of themes that's specifically approved by your administrators of the organization. Now, I'm going to go kind of quickly through this, but we have some really great resources that we've developed to be able to show people how to do this, step by step. So if I wanted to create an organizational theme that I could use in my stories, but also anyone else in my organization's stories, I would simply go up to this tab and create a new group. I've done that here, called Organization Theme Demo. Then I'd go to Add Items to Group. In here, you can see there are these items called Story Map Theme. And I'll just add a couple of those in here. And I'll click Add Items. When I do that, you can see that they now appear here in my group. Now, back in StoryMaps, we have a new tab here. So administrators of an organization account will see this option here when you click on your profile where it says admin, you'll go to organization settings. Under organization settings, you then can go into this group option drop down and find the group that you created. So mine is called Organization Theme Demo. So I'll find that. And you can see that my organization setting has now been saved. What that does is it opens up these themes that I've created that I want to be part of stories created by my organization to be accessible from the design panel. So if I go back to stories, I go into the story that I was just demoing. I then go into the design panel. I browse themes. I go to my organization. And now you can see that there's this theme that's, that was created as part of that group. So I can apply that. And now you see the font has changed and it has a different look and feel. This workflow is really good for creating a consistent look and feel behind all of the stories that you produce. Again, we've got some really helpful resources for getting started with this. This is fresh off the press, so we'd love to hear from you, hear where there might be pain points, and make sure that we're creating a solution that works for everyone. Okay, so just to recap, with our theme builder, we've got new font options with Google Fonts. We also have more styling options with our links, as well as being able to share themes within your organization. Okay, the second really exciting enhancement is to map tour block. So you might remember that we've got this immersive block called map tour. Now the big change is we now have this option to connect to data. What this means is you can connect it to feature services that you've created. So I'll just show you one example of this. I have a series of results that come in through survey 123. They each have an image and some description fields. And I can link that up to a map tour. So I click on that and it automatically will create a map tour block and populate all of these points with the latitude and longitude information, as well as description information. Now, in the data options, you have the ability to sort and filter your data. So I only want to see places that have media. So I'll click that button and it takes a minute for it to go through all of the points. And you can see now only the images, only the points that have images are appearing. Now I can also change the sorting option. So I'm going to sort descending, which means the most recent points that have been submitted will be appearing in this map tour. Now what's cool about that is this is a live survey. So anytime somebody submits a point to the survey, it will automatically create a new map tour point. Now one caveat is that you can only add 100 points at this time. So if you have a data set that's larger than 100 points, it will only display the first 100. Again, there's options to be able to go through and have your pop-ups look different and add more richness. And again, this is an automated feature, so you don't have to go in point by point and make those edits. Great. So, one other feature that we've demoed before, but there are kind of more options is, list versus grid view. Personally, I like grid view for, a large sample size like this. And now you can actually change the panel size as well. So if you want it to be, take up half of the screen, you can do that. And so when you click on one of these points, what happens is you get the image, you get that title field, as well as that description field that I was showing. So that's the place description. Really excited that we now have this option and can't wait to see how you guys use it. So again, map tour enhancement, you can do data-driven map tours, and you have more resize options. Okay, the last really exciting enhancement is the image gallery block. So we've heard from a lot of folks that they'd love a way to quickly create a grid of images that looks good and that can be, that can be shown larger as well. So to do this, we have this new image gallery block that's in beta right now. And you simply browse to your files. I have some that are ready to go here. And click Create Gallery. I couldn't help but include photos of my cats. So here you can always make it larger or smaller. You can also change the display from this jigsaw to dynamic squares. So you can see the difference between these two options. And again, this doesn't require any special formatting. You can always go in and reorder the media. So say you wanted to just play around with the layout, that's a really great way to do it. As always, you can add alternative text to these. Again, with just a few clicks of the button, you can add this nice gallery block. Let's take a look in preview for how these various blocks look. So I've applied my custom theme that came from the organization. So this brings in some nice new Google font options. I've created this map tour that has a wider panel here. This is data driven, so it came directly from a survey 123 data results. And as you look through these images, it will pan around on the map, and you can always click on them to make them larger. And finally, we've got this new image gallery block. Great way to display visual content. And we're really excited to see what you all create using these new blocks. So what I'm going to do now is just open a poll. Now this poll is really simple. We just want to see which of these enhancements you're most excited about. So this will be open for next minute or two, and feel free to vote for which one is you're most excited about. Okay, we'll go for another 30 seconds. Cast your vote, and then I'll share the results with everyone. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you all. So here we can see Map Tour Enhancements is the clear winner, but pretty much tied between the theme enhancements and the image gallery enhancements. Excellent, thanks for taking that poll. Okay, now we're moving on to my favorite segment of any StoryMaps Live. This is where we have featured storytellers that share the amazing work that they're doing, and we can hear from them about their storytelling techniques, as well as see some of the great work they're doing. So I'm happy to introduce Clarissa Dudenhofer and Cedric Vidone, who are information management officers with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So join me in welcoming them to StoryMaps Live, and I'll let them share their screen and get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Alan, and all the Esri team and everyone who came to hear us. So as Ross said, my name is Clarissa. I work with Cedric in the UN Refugee Agency. And what I'm going to tell you maybe today is a little bit of why we started using StoryMaps, how, and maybe a little bit about how we go about building the story itself, and then I'll hand it over to Cedric, who will talk to you a little bit more about the visuals, building them, the technical side. So do sit through, hang on, because the interesting part is coming when I'm finished. So essentially, in the humanitarian sector, we've seen in the last year is increased demand for data, for what we call evidence-based or evidence-informed decision-making, for a number of reasons, because of, let's say, technological advances that allow us to collect more data, analyze data more efficiently, because we have more access to places, because funding is short and we need to be able to allocate them efficiently. So we've seen this increased demand for data, and we embarked to comply with that demand, so to speak. But if all I care about is data, why the hell do I need a story map? Why do I need a story? Well, from UNHCR perspective, what happens often is we are looking at data that is seemingly insignificant. And I say that because we are talking about, for example, when you look into gender-based violence, what WHO says, the World Health Organization, and we believe that to be true, is that 1 in 3 women experiences some form of gender-based violence in their lives. But we also know that gender-based violence is significantly underreported. So what we need to do is look at the data that we have and look for signals that things may be happening. And we need to look into those signals and find the story that nobody is telling. So we need to show the data and we need to explain why this is important. And when we were working with these types of things, we also have a concept that is called irreversible harm, which is the idea that we need to raise awareness and respond to situations before certain types of harm are done that we can't really reverse. So I can't undo, I can't untorture someone, unkill someone, unrape someone. So it's important that we really look for those signals and we make sure that we communicate, that we tell the story of this very often very vulnerable people that we're working with, displaced communities, internally displaced, stateless people, asylum seekers, refugees. Another type of data that we also work with is information, let's say, on discrimination, xenophobia. Extremely sensitive, very underreported. So whenever we get a ping, we need to look at it, and we also need to say, okay, why is this one report actually important? We often also need to kind of contextualize the data and try to explain or make it tangible what the situation of those people is. I think it's often hard for everyone to grasp what the situation really is. And what we're trying to do is use data to illustrate the problem. And Cedric is going to talk to you about the centrality of data for our storytelling, because if we, on one hand, we really want to tell the story, we still want to keep it very data driven. So if you go through our stories, you see that more and more we've tried different things. We added more charts, we added more maps, and we tried to make them dynamic and more interesting. So just to bring also the data dynamic. Essentially how we go about it, and I've seen that you guys in Esri have put a document on how to outline your story, and it's really good. And if there's anyone new here, I would advise you to read it. It's really helpful. We started with StoryMaps at the start of COVID, actually. We were collecting all this data, and we thought, okay, there is a huge story here. Let's tell it. And it began precisely because of that issue. Our first story is talking about refugee rights, and it's talking about discrimination, xenophobia, all kinds of sensitive topics. And we thought it was important to tell that story and keep telling it. So we are at this stage, we have 3 stories on COVID, and we're working on it, and we'll start working on a 4th one. So essentially, we sit with whoever owns data within UNHCR, and we talk about, okay, what is the story that we want to tell? What are the key topics that we want to look into? And once we decide that, we start going and looking for data. What's out there on that topic that helps us tell the story? And I think what's important here on this part of the process is to be open to failure, which is difficult at the beginning. You're trying to say something, but sometimes the data isn't there. Sometimes the data is there, but it's not in the format that you need. So there are obstacles that will potentially come up, and you need to be flexible and maybe find then a different way to tell your story. So once, or at least how we go about it, once I find kind of the data points that I find more interesting, I start doing the analysis of the data, and then based on that, trying to tell a story that is a little bit more almost like a conversation, and not so much, 98% of people, blah, 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 that is less just, that is more fluid and really a story. And once this is done, then we get to my favorite part, which is when Cedric and I sit together and we brainstorm about the ways that we could visualize and make things interesting for you guys. So hoping that you read it. And it's amazing what this man can do. So I think for now, what I'm going to do is hand it over to him, so he can tell you all about building the visuals. And if you guys have any questions and you want me to say something more about the process or why UNHCR uses story maps and what kind of data we normally have, then I'm happy to answer that. So Cedric, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Clarissa. And I'm just showing my face for a little while, but then I will share my screen with you. And because I want to show you our work and not just our faces. So basically, Clarissa mentioned the work we are doing and kind of like the process of building those stories. But I think what is important for us and within the story map tool is that it's not only for storytelling, but it allows us also to expose our data, and not only our data, but every data that we collect from other agencies or partners. We will just kind of build these stories and really expose visually that data and be creative about it, and kind of like use any means to kind of share that data. So tonight I want to kind of like show you a few examples of the visuals we've done for this whole collection on COVID. You'll find the link in the chat, and I guess Ross will share it again later, but you can go through your own pace through those different stories. But right now I'm just gonna look a bit at some of the visuals we've created and what is the kind of like process behind it, and through that process a bit of the lesson learned we have had through that process. So here is just a simple example of a dynamic chart that has been made in ArcGIS dashboard. There is always this discussion about dynamic versus static chart. Here, basically, we wanted to be able to keep the data live and updated. So that was the perfect candidate for this kind of representation. So we kept it really simple, and you can actually create just one chart dashboard that you can then embed in your story map, and you create easily a dynamic chart that you can use there. So that's the kind of like use we do for dynamic report, or we can go on like more like aesthetic and advanced charting options like this that we do in Illustrator or tools like this. But this is static products, meaning that when it's there, it cannot change anymore. So it's always like finding the balance between the things that needs to be updated and the things that can remain the same. But the beauty of it is that then you can go completely crazy and be a bit creative in the different visuals you want to create. You can, just be as crazy as you want and be creative on your representation. And one thing we find really effective within those like static charts that have a bit more flexibility than the dynamic one is the ability to add some annotation to it and the ability to put some context in it. We could here include the emergency target for access to soap and what is the post-emergency target. And this can help really create this more context-oriented and more immersive story about the product. I want to go to the next tab, but this, I have the, how can I go to this one? I don't want to go to the next tab, but it doesn't have my, yes, here we are. And here we can see that we even could include some context to the data. Here we are talking about number of liters of potable water available per person per day. And those are the emergency target. It's 15 liter, 20 liter, the post-emergency target. And these are a few countries with the main refugees emergency. And you can see here, we had the ability to add the context of Europe. Europe is 144 liter a day of water consumption. So you can see the gap between the population we're interested in, the refugees and the displaced population and the common people in Europe or in the US. So it's really, you can really add some context to your data by playing a bit with it. But for us, the main added value, I think, of the story map is the sidecar. I think we've been using the sidecar in many ways in our stories. This is a kind of like a typical use of a sidecar where we had something related to COVID and access to territory due to COVID restriction, and it goes all around the world. So with the power of sidecar, you can create a bit more immersive story and go within a region, specific region, and see a bit more detail to that region. And I think it's really could help you build stronger and more effective story. But what we've discovered by using sidecar more and more is that you can actually use it with really in-depth story by just kind of like creating a step-by-step story that you want to say. So here, it's we are talking about an example. This is the city of Sao Paulo, and this is the density of population of Sao Paulo that is represented on within the shape of the city. And what we wanted to talk here, and when you go through the story, is that we will then talk about what is the actual minimum humanitarian standard of like space available within a camp. And you see directly the differences of density that it represents when we go for that. Sao Paulo is already a highly populated city, and you see what it means. And then we went a bit further and looked at what is the population in Kutupalang, which is one camp in Bangladesh. And if we were actually applying the density of that camp to the shape of Sao Paulo, it will mean a city of over 62 million. And this is a really great use of the sidecar. And one we've discovered just recently is also, or we could use this sidecar with just simple charts. And if you have the same variable over and over, it could just be a good way to compare this. Here we are looking at how the education had been disrupted because of COVID. And here we're just looking at just one of the solutions for education in times of COVID is to provide it remotely. But here we're looking about the population in the main refugee emergency and IDP emergency, internally displaced person emergency. And we see that they don't really have access to computer or internet. And with using this kind of like slider, we could go for computer and then look at internet access and just scroll down then to mobile network and all of this. And I think it's a really powerful tool to create a like kind of like build a step-by-step story and reinforce the message throughout. Just one little thing about the process. For a long time, we've been doing this kind of visual through Illustrator or like graphic software. But as a international organization, we have to translate, or we actually do translate most of our work. So now most of our story map are translated at least into Spanish and French, beside English. So we kind of like switch in terms of like tools we are using, and we are leaning to what are more and more and like dynamic charting tool that then we can just build everything related to the title, the subtitle, the legend, the country names, and everything to the data. But what this has opened to us, it's then the possibility to create animation like this. This is another layer of kind of like making visuals for StoryMap, and you'll see we're working on a new one right now, and it includes way more animation that we've never used before. And I think this is just because working more and more on those story map, it opened us like our scope of tools to use, and created this new possibility for us. I will just go through quickly, talk a bit about maps, as we are like talking to a map community, just to show that we also use like some different type of maps here. It's a time lapse showing basically COVID cases among refugee population through time. And it's also possible to just embed what do you call it? Like timing maps. So it's really nice to see the evolution of this. And also this new map slider option that is really efficient if you want to compare two different data sets here. And with that, I'm done. I will hand it over to Ross for the Q&A session, I think. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was awesome. I have seen a lot of questions coming in through the chat, but want to just let everybody know who's attending that you can continue to add questions that you have for our featured storytellers or about the product to the Q&A. And now for the last 20 minutes or so, we'll be taking those questions live and answering them. And so Clarissa and Cedric, it'd be great if we could just kind of continue this conversation. I wanted to follow up on a couple things you mentioned. One, Cedric, you mentioned, in terms of the graphics that you're creating, you previously just used like the Adobe suite or other graphic softwares, but how have you pivoted? There's a user who's interested in how you've been constructing these in story maps themselves.
Yeah, so basically, right now, it's also because now we can upload SVG on story maps and it works really well. And then the quality of graphic is way better. We kind of like switch to the R statistic software. So it's basically a statistic tool. We are using RStudio and ggplot2 to create our charts. And what it does allow us is like, as it's a statistic tool, basically everything can be data. So in our like data set, we have a sheet that is basically the data set itself, let's say the country names and the variable we want to chart. And we have an extra sheet where basically we have the title, we have the subtitle, we have the legend, we have the axis name, or all of this, and the data source or whatever we want to add to the chart itself. And we did that because basically when we translate it, instead of like having to recreate a list of every single label in an Excel or whatever software to share with the colleague for translation, we just directly share the Excel file with the colleague and they fill an extra column. Let's say we have a column for English, then a column for Spanish, et cetera, and we work that way. And the other beauty of R and this kind of tool is basically when the chart has been created once, if you change everything related to language and stuff, it just run the code again and it builds a new chart in a new language. If you're in Illustrator, all this process is manual and require quite some time.
That's so helpful. Did you use the embed block when you incorporated that in, or did you use a different workflow?
What do you mean? Yeah, but I used just upload an image type of
Yes,
block.
you just uploaded an image. Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
The option. Nice. Yeah, that's a great workflow. And one that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of is that SVG, that vector format for graphics that are really crisp. The other question was about your time series map. Can you talk a little bit more about how you created that, and whether that was also in R or with another tool.
So no, the time series map has been done in ArcGIS Online. It's basically like a web map with a time enabled layer. And sorry, there was a template to create a time enabled web app that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And this is what I used. And so this is all I built it, because you cannot, if I'm correct, I think you cannot embed directly a time-enabled web map. It has to be a web app, so you embed the web app. If I'm
Yeah,
correct me if I'm
a web
wrong.
app to bring it in. Yeah, time-enabled features is something that we're hearing that there's interest from the broader StoryMaps community. And we're thinking about like, okay, should this be a timeline block? Should this be an animated? You press play and you see this, data visualization change. So that's really interesting, the ways that you're incorporating that. Another question about translation that came in was, how have you been able to create a story that's in English, French, Spanish? Are you, what's the best workflow that you've been using or would recommend, not just for your charts, but for, the whole story itself?
So this is a lot of manual work. So basically we create it in one language and then we just duplicate it and change the language. We are lucky enough to work in multiple languages in UNHCR. So we have a whole team that will translate the thing for us. Maybe I can just quickly again share my screen to show you how we actually implemented it in the story themselves. We just created a link at the top of the story. So nothing completely fancy, but basically just link here. Oops, a bit too far here, with like link between the different stories. And we also use the advantage of the collection to create collection by language. But yeah, nothing fancy here, and we are welcoming any improvement on this side.
Yeah, and so you click on French and it goes to the same story itself, just all the graphics and everything has been translated. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. So now it will just load. Sorry, my internet is a bit slow, but it will just load the story in French.
Right. You can already see the title.
Here you have it. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And even the graphs. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, something I wanted to ask you a little bit more about is sort of the graphic design of your stories. And, do you work with designers? Do you contract that out? Is that in-house? What is kind of the, process for coming up with the visual language of your story so that it's unified and has a nice presentation?
Well, so basically, and maybe Clarissa can add to that too, but basically building the story is kind of like a two-man job, Clarissa and I, on this one, at least, kind of like pushing the project through, and we have help of like a communication colleague to kind of like clean the language and make it more, wide audience friendly. But in terms of the visual, it's just my personal background. I have a background in GIS, but also in graphic design. So we are building all the graphics ourselves. And as Clarissa mentioned during her intervention, we basically kind of when the story is more or less up, we can brainstorm on the visuals with the data set we have. And it's, mainly just us two doing this job, and with the help of the kind of like client that are within the house. But that's kind of the process. And in terms of like consistency, we're just following the brand. There's nothing specific here that is not, nothing. I don't know if Clarissa, you want to add anything?
No, as I said, it's literally just us brainstorming and sometimes me asking things that are not possible, and just trying to make sure that the data really interacts with the story, and it's kind of one supporting the other. Over.
Yeah. Another question I had was, I can imagine there are some hurdles you had to go through to start using ArcGIS StoryMaps within this large organization of the United Nations. And so I was curious about how you were able to, sort of what made you guys advocate for adopting this tool, and has that process become easier over time, or is it still kind of everyone takes a ton of time because there's so much, you're a big organization, so there's, all these groups involved?
I think I led that one to Clarissa, but
I'm also left with the hot potato. Well, I would say a couple of things. I think generally it has become easier to use the platform for a number of reasons. I think we've gotten used to StoryMaps. We've gotten used to each other because we just started working together less than a year ago. And we've established now this flow with, we sit with the client, I develop the outline, we brainstorm on the output, on the visualization, then we hand it over to our external communication colleagues. So we have now a more established process, whereas at the beginning, or the very first story, it was just, headless chickens, and it took us, I think, maybe 4 months or something to publish the story, and then the second one took, I think, maybe 3, and the third one took maybe 2. So and now the last one is about to take 2 to 3 weeks. So if we've been really we've been able to optimize the process a little bit. But obviously, I mean, I assume that also in other organizations, not only the UN, you'd have some sort of clearance process, for example, or you want to have a communication strategy behind your story to make sure that you launch it. You don't launch it on a weekend because people are not likely to see it, or that you would, if you're an organization putting out multiple products, that you wouldn't want to put this out together with any other big publication. So it's good to, I think, at the outset, when you decide to come up with a story, that you also have a little bit of a tentative timeline or plan where you try to foresee these things and try to have a good overview of all the elements, from really developing the story all the way to actually being able to publish it. I don't know if Cedric, you now want to add something over.
No, I think you said it all, and I think also it's easier now because when people see it, then they understand what it is, and when they see the nice product, they're like, yeah, actually I want the same one, and they care a bit less about exposing their data, which was a bit complicated before with UNHCR, and it's getting better now. So I think that's also this, when they see the beautiful product, then it becomes a bit easier to sell the next one.
For sure. There was a question that came in about audio integration into stories, and I was curious if you've experimented with audio at all. For attendees, you can incorporate audio in a couple different ways. One is there's an audio block where you can upload audio directly, but you can also use it as background for within that sidecar block, which you were talking about earlier, Cedric. So I was curious if you've experimented with audio in your stories at all, particularly as it's a humanitarian related story, and thoughts on that.
We actually did. We just embedded a song. Maybe let me share my screen again. We embedded a song within one of our stories. It's a song that has been created in one refugee camp. I think it was about access to soap or water or something like this, or like giving instruction also about social distancing, washing your hands and stuff like this. So we included it as it was already on the web on SoundCloud, so it was an easy integration. But that's the only one we've done, I think, Clarissa, no? Besides maybe videos that had some sound, but nothing really related to audio itself.
Yeah, no, that's a nice way to integrate it. Yeah, as an embedded, you can embed SoundCloud, links directly in. Be a really effective storytelling tool. Another question that came in was about how to get it out in front of your audience, and whether you're embedding it directly into a website or whether you're using just the StoryMaps URL right there in the browser via social campaigns or linking to it from your website. So how are people finding your stories?
I think I will start giving an answer, and Clarissa probably can add on that. But I think mainly what we are doing is we are creating a story or like an article directly on the unhcr.org website, and we link to the story within that article. We also use definitely social media platform and everything like this. We had the last one, we had a Twitter campaign and stuff like this, but that's also one of the issue we have to sell it within the broader community with UNHCR, because they would love to have it set on the UNHCR domain and world and not kind of like linked to the outside world.
Right.
So this is more a technical issue here than anything else, but we have tried to embed it into the website. The result itself is not really and doesn't really look good. So that's the solution we have for now. It's basically create an article about the story on the UNHCR website, and then we'll link to the story map. I don't know, Clarissa, yeah.
You said it all. Yeah, no, so that's what I meant a little bit with the communication strategy, is that you think about how to get your story out there, that you think about Twitter or Facebook engagement, or that you create an article on your website, or that you email it to people. I don't know. But one thing that I saw that came up on the chat is someone talking about using data from smartphones. And I'm sorry, I can't answer your question, but I did think about something that is important to remember, because I never do. And I know that Cedric is always like, think about mobile. Think about how this is going to look for someone scrolling through the story on their phone. And it might be silly, and it might be obvious to most of you guys out there, but it is really good to keep that in mind as well when you're developing the story. Over.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that same question. Was, when you have really large data sets that you're working with, how have you sort of incorporated that into a story? Do you typically embed it directly? Do you create static graphics that then represent it? If you have these live data feeds coming in, has that impacted the performance that you're seeing, or caused you to design your story in a different way?
I mean, the only case we actually faced that, or like kind of like live data or updating data, was for the first one we've made. And I have to say that the fact that the dynamic charts transformed to a card on mobile was not a real deal breaker for us. I think we would have loved to put like an image in place of the chart, but it would mean that every 2 weeks we would have to update the static chart and update the image on the websites, which is not maintainable. And especially right now that we are making more and more story maps, when you manage 1 or 2, it's okay, but when you have to go and manage 20, it will become impossible to do that every 2 weeks. So I don't know if there was a way to, especially if we stay in the Esri realm, to kind of like have a static version of the dynamic chart. Let's say if you make it in Arc Pro, if you make it in dashboard, I don't know, this is just me dreaming, but that would really kind of like solve the issue to sell this sometimes. But I think they really wanted the updated value and the possibility to go back in time. So that was easy to say, okay, so if you want this is the only solution.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's all really helpful for both the attendees and for us. So unfortunately, we're at the end of our time together. thank you both so much for being our featured storytellers. It's been so fun talking with you both, and continue your inspiring work. We can't wait to see what you create. That next story is going to be really fun to take a look at. And to the attendees, thank you so much for coming. Again, feel free to reach out. We're really active on Twitter, and our blog post is being updated daily pretty much. So stay tuned for new enhancements and our next StoryMaps Live in a couple months. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.